Hello, everybody. Saludos. I'm welcoming you here. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Jane Alberdeston Coralin, and I work as a professor in the Department of English at UPR Arecibo. UPRA, Lobos. I'm very excited to be here with compañeros, with APPU, and for the Proyecto Literario, a very important project, a necessary project, one that I support with all my heart. And hopefully through these exercises and these workshops, we will get a wonderful product from hearing your stories and your poems. So, Taller de Escritura Creativa for today is Ambiente. I've left the bio here for you to look at, just a little bit about me. And I welcome you to Proyecto Literario Docencia desplazada, la inestable experiencia de enseñar en Puerto Rico. Now, if you notice, I'm already stumbling with my Spanish, so I want you to ignore my Spanish. Today's talk will be in English simply because I don't want to confuse you with my Spanish. My abuela used to say that I had lengua de trapo, so let's avoid any pain in that way. I called the presentation today Moving Mountains because I wanted to show that setting is a very powerful element of writing in fiction. Using setting to make your story come alive. And so that's why I said moving mountains, using the elements of setting to make your story come to life. The image that I've included here is 2 books that I think are a valuable resource. I'm no longer using Amazon, but you can find these books in other websites that look at writers' works and how to improve your writing. I use a writer's guide. I've been writing for many years now, and I've been published in different journals, and I'm working on a novel. And it doesn't matter how long you've been writing, these guides are always useful. So this one is called The Rural Setting and also The Urban Setting. And again, they are very helpful. And if you want to know more about the different resources that I use, I can, of course, leave with the website a list of works that I've used before, that I use in the classroom, and that will be helpful to you. All right, so what are we doing today, friends? Today, we are going to learn about 2 different forms of setting, an ambiente, 2 different forms of setting. Now, setting has many. There's time, there's location, there's climate, the weather conditions. But the ones that we're going to focus on today are social conditions and mood and atmosphere. Now, why did I choose these? Because these are the hardest ones to do. I admit it myself. These are very difficult to practice. You have to really get into understanding what they are. It's in a story, it's almost secondhand to think about time. We can look at our watch. We can look at the day. Is it sunny outside? Is it dark? Is it nighttime? Is it mid-afternoon? We can almost tell what the time is by opening the window. Location, that's also easy. We can know where we are. We can center a place very focused, or we can make it very broad and general, like a city or a town or a street versus a house, a room, a corner. Climate, weather conditions, again, something that we can check the news or open the window and we'll know. But social conditions are even a little bit harder. We have to make some decisions about what we want to do in our story, what we want to show, and what we want the reader to learn about our story. And I know some of you might think, I only write for myself. Yes, it may be that you only write for yourself, and sometimes this is a good thing to do, is to write for yourself because it's very cathartic, and especially with something like a Proyecto Literario, where we're trying to sort of dust off our feelings and pay attention to our personal situations and really focus on giving back to ourselves through the writing experience. That's important. But it's also important to have a reader, to have someone to share. That's how That's the importance of literature, to be able to share with another person those thoughts, those feelings, those emotions that we keep bottled up inside. So social conditions are important. And the second one is mood and atmosphere. I'm going to define them, and we're going to talk about them, and then we're going to practice them. Okay, that's the application that we'll do at the end. Social conditions in a short story. Now, there are a lot of slides here. I'm not going to cover all of them because I don't want you to go to sleep. So I will cover, I think, the ones that are really important. I may not last a long time on one slide. I may not linger. I may move on, but you will have the presentation in its complete form for you to access at any time. Okay, so what's a definition of the social conditions? Social conditions give form to the story's theme. In other words, if you have a story and the theme is love, then the social conditions of that story will reflect a relationship, a family. Right now, we're experiencing this crisis of COVID-19. So if I was going to write a love story and I wanted to use the social conditions of that story, I might show two romantics or a couple that cannot see each other. They might share their love via video, via Zoom, or via Skype, right? Because that's essentially what's happening right now. People are not able to be together all the time. So the social condition would be, it would reflect that this is a couple who's in love, but they can't actually be physical with one another. So the social condition is a crisis that's happening that prevents love from blossoming. They have to do this via their TV screens or their monitors. So social conditions give physical form to the story's theme. They also give the reader a picture of the environment in which it's set. So if we're, again, back to COVID-19, if I want to show a picture of the social conditions, I might write about masks being thrown on the floor or blowing in the wind, right? Because that's a setting. Now, I've never seen a mask blowing in the wind until the other day. Before March of this year, I'd never seen a mask blowing in the wind. I saw one the other day. So what does that tell me? That there are more masks that are being lost or thrown away or just dropped onto the ground so that they're affecting the environment. So here is an idea for a story just from the social conditions. Okay, the last one. Social conditions give local color to the story through the character's speech. So for instance, a lot of students tell me that when they go to the States, they have a really hard time, like in a state like Tennessee, because everybody has a particular accent, like a very, very Southern accent. Tennessee has a different accent than Mississippi. Mississippi has a different accent from Texas. And if you go up to Maine, you're going to hear, or Massachusetts or Vermont, you're going to hear a completely different form of speech. That's local color. So if you're writing a story and your story is set in Tennessee, there's going to be a way in which those characters speak that has to come to true. It has to show that it's real. If your characters don't have not all of them, but if a couple of characters don't have a Southern accent, someone's going to say, are they really in Tennessee? So social conditions allow you to sort of dress the story in this way. If it were here in Puerto Rico, you could talk about different ways of speaking that are very particular to a town, either urban or rural. So someone in the middle of a city might use a phrase, or you could speak generationally, right? So for instance, a, a group of people living at a nursing home are not going to be the same, not going to have the same way of speaking as a group of people at a high school. I can already hear those two different groups speaking. That's the local color that you're giving. If you're writing historical story, historical fiction, then you're going to pay attention to the way that people dress, their mannerisms, the way their gestures, the way in which they hold themselves and what they do with their hands. You're also going to look at traditions of a place, how people act with one another, their customs. Okay, so that was a very long definition, but I wanted to show you what social conditions do in a story, how they help your story. Now, how do you think about social conditions when you kind of have to already have a sense of what your story is going to be about and a sense of your character, right? So you might already have, I'm going to switch back a little bit. For your story, you might already have the time, you might have the location, you might have the climate. So sometimes social conditions and mood and atmosphere will come later as you write your story. And then that's when you ask these questions. What is the character's social status and class? What is happening in the lives of the characters? Are they struggling through a crisis? Have they lost their job? What does it look like for this character to have lost their job? What does their home look like? You don't want to get into generalizations or stereotypes, right? In fact, you might do something completely new and different because it is your story. But you do have to ask these questions. If a person lost their job, what does their home look like? I'll give you an example. Mommy, when we lived in Seva, this was in the 80s, we lived in Seva, and mommy got a job in San Juan. There was no work in Seva, so she got a job in San Juan en el edificio federal. Now, back then there was just one road. It was a very dusty road. Mommy did not have air conditioning in her car, so it was very hot and very dusty all the way 4 in the morning from Seva all the way to San Juan in the 1980s. Now, if you imagine, you don't know my mother, you don't know me, you don't know what she drove. Well, she had a blue Mazda, a blue 1984 Mazda. And when you would go into her car, you couldn't really sit. There was nowhere to sit because mommy had her whole life inside that car. She had her lunch, of course. She had shoes. She had like a closet in the car because she didn't want to get her work clothes dusty. So she would have her dress in a plastic sheet. She had her lots of shoes that she could pick from, and she just drove in her regular house clothes to get to work. So her car became very vivid. It became almost like a character of its own. It's still setting, but it comes to life. It says something about my mother's experience driving from Ceiba to San Juan every day back and forth. So if I'm going to write that story, I'm going to make sure I talk about the inside of her car. It's going to be dusty because there was no air conditioning because she didn't have money to get the air conditioning. That talks about her social status, right? Her financial status, her economic status. So when you include these details in a story, you're actually talking a lot about the person's life, the character's life. So there aren't details that you should ignore. They are details that are important, can be important. So you can look at historical, political, cultural events, and other situations that help inform your story. Is your story populated by people that are pretty much all the same, or are they a diverse group of people? If you're going to write a story about Lapland, right? If you're going to write a story about a city in Norway, then you have to kind of know like what those neighborhoods are like. They're not very diverse. Now you can introduce setting that makes it kind of diverse, but again, it's social status, it's the social conditions of the story that you decide and how you affect the characters in the story through those conditions. And lastly, the last question is the most important. What do their daily lives look like? Even though you're not going to write about their everyday, you're going to write about one moment, because a short story is one moment. But what does that one moment look like? Okay. I have here an example from Eli Wiesel. It's an excerpt from his novel Night. Crammed into cattle cars by the Hungarian police, they cried silently. Standing on the station platform, we too were crying. The train disappeared over the horizon. All that was left was thick, dirty smoke. So if you look here, social conditions are very clear. I mean, we know what they're talking about. Not once is there the word Holocaust, right? That doesn't exist. You don't need it to exist because the details, the social conditions of the story give the reader the information they need to know. Crammed into cattle cars, okay? The next one, standing on the station platform, the train disappearing over the horizon. We can see the horizon. And then after we see the horizon, what's left is a big, thick cloud of thick, dirty smoke. So all of these details, if you took description with Eduardo Ortiz, then you know how important these details are. Setting needs them because setting, again, helps tell that story. Okay, I've written here a prompt that maybe you want to practice on your own. This is a famous painting by Whistler, by the American painter James McNeill Whistler. And so I love to use this one in class because I want students to think about, like, what is the situation behind this picture? What are the social conditions, by looking at the setting itself? Not even the character. You don't really need to see the character as much. You can look at all the elements of the picture around her to think about the social conditions of this character's life. A lot of people call this Whistler's mother, but interestingly enough, that's not the title of the actual work. But something in this image has made people want to call him her mother. It was her mother. His mother. All right, so we talked about social conditions, and I hope that you got a sense of what I meant by social conditions. The next one is mood. Mood is harder to explain, but I want you to think about, we just had Halloween. We just went through Halloween. I spent all of Halloween and a couple of days before that watching scary movies, watching terrifying movies, horror movies. But how do you know it's a horror movie? Well, there are elements to a horror movie that really give you the mood. Before they even say they're horror, you know it's going to be terrifying because the mood has been imparted. So what is mood? Mood is the feeling. So in this slide, it says emotional, feeling, attitudes. Mood is the attitude, the feeling, the emotions that you get from the details in the setting. So a lot of the movies that I watched on Halloween, everything was at night. There were maybe there was a moon, especially if you watch the old movies from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and some of the 60s with Christopher Lee, right? The vampire movies, the first vampire movies, Nosferatu from the 20s, right? All those movies had a bright, shining moon over a dark landscape and maybe mist coming off of the earth. All of that, all of those details are setting, and they set the mood. This is not, you know, that this is not going to be a love story. There might be a love story in there, but it is not the key story that's being told. Somehow, this is supposed to terrify. This is supposed to make you afraid and go running for the hills. So, mood brings light to the emotional setting of a story. It gives the reader a feeling. They get a sense of what kind of story they're going to read. And it can reflect the attitudes of the characters who inhabit the story or mirror the story's conflict. Okay, so I've given you the example here of Superman. We can think of Superman versus Batman, right? But Superman, if you think of Superman, he's a very wholesome character, very innocent character, the good guy. He's the good guy. But how do we know he's the good guy outside of his actions? His actions are characterization. How does setting help us see that he's a good guy? Well, Superman and the idea of Superman was kind of written with the idea of he was hurtled out of space, and he falls into an American farmland, and that's supposed to be sort of like the symbol of Americanism, of American spirit. And sometimes that can be a problematic image, but I'm using Superman as an example of, well, here's setting, the American farm, a barn, everything very innocent and good, right? And right and wholesome. And then here you have Superman. So the setting can tell you something about the character versus Batman, where you have a dark character, a conflicted character. And when does he fight? He doesn't fight during the day. He only comes out at night, in the darkest of the night. Superman has the daylight, Batman has the night. Batman has they're both in an urban, they're both a city, they both live in cities, but there's something gritty about Gotham, dangerous as it relates to Gotham. Whereas Superman, you have Metropolis, right? So this idea of setting helping tell you something about the character, not just the story, but the character, is also important. It's complex, but it's fun to try. I know this is a lot of information, but I just want you to have fun trying all these things. All right, so we all know this one. Boom, 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 boom. The Telltale Heart from Edgar Allan Poe. If you have not read this story, you must read this story. It is great as far as setting. When I read this in 8th grade, I had nightmares for weeks. My mom was not too happy with my teacher. But it's a fantastic story. So I've put here an excerpt of that. And when the door was opened wide enough, I put my hand in, and then my head. In my hand, I held a light covered over with a cloth so that no light showed, and I stood there quietly. Then carefully, I lifted the cloth just a little so that a single thin, small light fell across that eye. For 7 nights, I did this. 7 long nights. Every night at midnight, always the eye was closed, so it was impossible for me to do the work, for it was not the old man I felt I had to kill. It was the eye, his evil eye. All right, so I underlined the first line because that's the setting. The door opens like an eye, right? When the door was open wide enough, I put my hand in, then my head. Just like the eye that's open, the door is open. So again, here's setting, helping add to the terror of the story. The eye is the old man's eye. That's character, right? It's a symbol too. But that first line mimics the idea of the eye, so it's just as terrible. All right, then I bolded the I because the I leads you to more setting. Here it is. A single thin, small light fell across that eye. For 7 nights I did this, 7 long nights, every night at midnight. This is repetition. Repetition is very useful in setting. It's purposeful. You have to be careful using it, that it just doesn't sound like you forgot what you were trying to say. You want to use it sparingly, but you do want to use it so that every time you use it, it adds a little bit more to that mood, to that feeling. The first 7 nights, okay. But then he says 7 long nights. Okay, so now we're getting more mood. And then he says every night at midnight. And now you know you're talking about a horror story. Now you know there's something that's scary that's coming. Okay, so you can use setting to lead, you can use mood in setting to lead you to know something more about the character, or more about the conflict, or more about the plot. Ways to enhance your setting? Well, you can use images. That's what we just talked about here. The door was opened wide enough. Diction. Diction are the words you choose. Everything you do in writing is on purpose. You might have a happy accident and then decide, oh, I like that, I'm going to keep it. But usually everything you do when you write a story is purposeful. So if we think about the words that are chosen by Eli Wiesel, I'm sorry, I'm going back here, but Eli Wiesel, he used the word crammed. He didn't say train cars, he used cattle cars. These are very specific words to use. Crammed to give that sense of tightness, of no air, of no space, and a cattle car to show that these were not people being treated. They were being treated the way some people might treat animals, and maybe not even animals. So this idea of looking specifically at words and their power of a word is important in all the elements of writing, not just setting. Tone is the attitude of the narrator or the characters in the story. And then motifs. We're not going to really go over these today because then I'll have you here for hours, but tone and motifs. So the motif would be like the evil eye that kept repeating itself throughout the story. Now, how do you choose mood? Again, diction. So in order to get that sense of feeling, you have to know what kind of feeling you want to give. So romantic, mysterious, ominous. This is a very short list. There are many, 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 many more. And there are websites that have long lists of words that you can use for mood. But this gives you an idea of the different moods that a story can have. So if we think about Edgar Allan Poe's, I don't think it would even be mysterious. There's no mystery, right? It's already fearful, tense, gloomy, right? So right there are 3 words. Ominous. So 1, 2, 3. 3 words, 4 words that we could use to describe the mood of that story. So when you start writing, so the step 1, the reason I said step 1 is that this is how you're going to start thinking about writing. You need a mood. You need to know what mood your story is going to have. Sometimes the conflict can help you decide the mood, or sometimes the mood can help you decide the conflict. The conflict, again, is the problem in the story, the thing that is surrounding the main character or the protagonist's life. All right, if you have not seen this painting, I don't know if it's returned to Puerto Rico because it was traveling for a while, but it was at the Museo de Arte de Puerto Rico in Ponce. It's a gorgeous painting, and it's owned by the museo. They say that nobody wanted the painting, nobody liked it, and so Puerto Rico was able to purchase it. Now everybody wants it, and Puerto Rico doesn't have it for sale, which is great. So I want you to think, remembering the list of words that we had in the previous slide, right? I want you to think of a word, this prompt, of a word that sort of invites the mood. What is the mood for this image? I'll give you a second there. If you pop back to the list, which one do you think fits best? This time I'm not going to tell you because I think I'm going to give you a chance to think about it on your own. If you were my students, then I would invite a suggestion, but I think you guys can do that on your own. All right, so again, Flaming June, and you're thinking about the mood for this image. Step 2, choose a social. After you've chosen the mood, now step 2 is to choose a social condition. You want to have the real world in mind. This was a very big lesson to me when I was first writing. I had a wonderful professor who said, Jane, it doesn't matter if it's science fiction or fantasy, you should still have the real world in mind. Your imagination is going to be buttressed, right? It's going to be supported by what you see as the real world. You want your story to be believable. It can be out on a planet in the middle of the second solar system. That doesn't matter. But does your reader believe the characters? Could they imagine themselves in that space, in that setting? Even if they've never seen it before, do you put them through your description and through your mood and social conditions? Do you put them there in that spot? So I think that's important to remember, is believability. That's how you get your reader to connect with you. So for instance, what does the interior of a house look like for a germaphobe? Now, some of you might say, oh, it's spot clean, it's spot clean. But what about your story? What is your story? If the place is spot clean, then there's no conflict. What if there's one spot that germaphobe can't get rid of? One stain that maybe every day grows and grows and grows and starts to affect the mind of the main character. See? So yeah, so it has to be something that is kind of pushing the boundaries of your reader. You want them to think. What does a city bus station look like at night? I always love that because there are so many city bus stations. And if you've ever been in a city bus station at night, like especially like a Greyhound, like they have in the States, or one that just travels from one end of the island to another, um, like a Publico, like there used to be Publicos, right? Um, or people who take Uber from one place to another long place. What's that like at night? What's that experience? What happens? Who's there? What does a place look like? All of that's important. There's a difference between a bus station at night and a bus station during the day. And your reader is going to look for that because they might know. So you want to be believed. You want your story to be believed. Step 3, let your character interact with the setting. How do they do that? Through their actions, the dialogue, their behavior. When we looked at Edgar Allan Poe, he opens the door slowly, and then he holds the lamp and lifts the cloth from the lamp, right? All that is part of setting. We're supposed to imagine that as soon as he lifts the lamp, that then we can see more light irradiate through the room. So you have to make sure that your setting makes sense with your character, that your character is actually interacting, not that they're just sitting in a chair with the setting doing nothing. The setting should be an active part of the story. They should be interacting, touching it, either physically or emotionally. Okay, I feel like I'm going very quickly. Here is the reason I have taxis, because I have a little bit of a story to tell you. So here is practice. Okay, so maybe you know this person, maybe you don't, maybe you've seen him online. I'd like to introduce you to Profesor Mario Silvano. His video, I think, is set in Argentina. Now, one of our fellow cuentistas talked to me, I guess about a month ago, about los docentes en taxi, o los docentes taxis, o los profesores taxi. And I thought it was a really interesting story. I thought it was an important story that he told me about professors in Argentina who have more than one gig, right? They have more than one job. So they're teaching at one university and then they have to go teach at another university and then another, all in the same day. I did that too. You sort of have to travel between universities in order to have something of a normal salary, or try to have a normal salary. Usually it doesn't reach there, but it's the attempt. So these professors in Argentina, they started calling them profesores taxi or docentes taxi. Now they're calling them docentes Uber or profesores Uber. Um, He's going to tell you, I put the link there, he's going to tell you the story about his day. I didn't test it to see if it will play the video, if you can hear it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you hear the video on your own, and then I'm going to tell you what he tells us. Okay, this is sort of a script in English of what he expresses in the video. But please watch the video because it's wonderful to hear it from him in his voice and in Spanish, in that very beautiful Argentinian Spanish. Okay, Mario and his daughter start the day early, making their way to his daughter's school. They sing on the journey, but their choice of songs depends on the morning's weather. So if it's really sunny, they cantan mañana Campeche. If it's raining or if it's ugly, then they sing viento dile a las lluvias. So they sing the day depending on the weather. So there you have weather conditions. After dropping his daughter off at school, he starts his day teaching at his first teaching site. Then Mario returns home for lunch, which he says is the most enjoyable part of his day. And then he spends the rest of the afternoon teaching at 2 more schools. He ends with an ironic comment to his story, si esta vida de placeres me está matando. Okay, he says it much better, but si esta vida de placeres me está matando. All right, this is like a journal entry. It's his blog. All he does is take you from what happens in the morning to what happens in the afternoon, and then he makes a comment about it at the end. That's not story. That's not story. That's like a diary entry. Lo que hice en el día. That's not a story. How do we make what he wrote or what he spoke in his video a story? Like, let's look at how it works as far as the mood and social conditions are concerned. Okay, Mario and his daughter start the day early, making their way to work and school. There you have time, because you know, day early, work and school. We're imagining school starts early, so you have time. They sing on the journey, but their choice of song depends on the morning's weather. Well, we can't see what weather they're singing about, but we hear the songs. So the songs tell us the weather. I thought that was lovely. Si estos tiempos lindos, cantamos mañana Campeche. Si está medio feo, viento dile a las lluvias. Here we have weather conditions, but we also have mood. The mood, the dark weather or the rain makes them sad. Okay? Something very beautiful, they sing a different song. So mood that's where you get mood, the feeling of the story. After dropping his daughter off at school, he starts his day at his first teaching site. There you have location. When Mario, or place. Then Mario returns home for lunch, which he says is the most enjoyable part of his day. Now, if lunch is his most enjoyable part of the day, you have social conditions, mood, and conflict. I love giving class. I adore giving class. I like lunch, but I love giving class. I can skip lunch and talk to my students. I like doing that. But for Mario, it's different. So something is wrong. So there you might have a little bit of conflict, and you definitely have social conditions, and you have mood because of the word enjoyable. He spends the rest of the afternoon teaching at 2 more schools. Then again, that's a little bit more of conflict and social conditions, because now we say contra. He's teaching at 3 schools in one day. That must be hectic. So now we know we have social conditions and conflict. Conflict's another element of storytelling, but you can see how they can start to come together and help one another. He ends his story with an ironic comment on what could be the mood and social conditions of his story. Si esta vida de placeres me está matando, right? So there you have the social conditions. He's not happy. Lunch is his most enjoyable part of the day. That's the moment he can rest. And then at the end, he says he's dying with all the work that he has to do. Okay, so that's one way to learn how to break up your story, to make sure that you've got everything covered from setting. Okay, so what I did was I wrote a story for you all that I thought was really interesting, but it comes from Mario's video. And why did I do that? Because I wanted to show you that even if you do not want to write about, if you don't want to reflect on a part of your life to write about your life, you can use someone else's life and sort of uh, live in that story to create your creative work. You can borrow an idea. You can be inspired by someone else's situation. So I was inspired by Mario's story, by Professor Silvano's story, and so I wrote a story. And I wanted to show you where it's underlined are all the places that I have mood and social conditions. So the moment Freira slid from her mother's uterus, her cries in the nursery ward drew the winds. So here we have not the wind, but winds. So I'm showing it's a forceful, it's like a storm. So there I'm kind of showing weather conditions with a little bit of the mood. If you have winds, then it's dangerous. So danger would be the mood. Every time the infant was hungry or cold or afraid, afraid means mood, those winds would crash against the glass panes, rattling them until each began to crack. So again, I'm building on the mood of danger. The hospital personnel grew terrified, here we are terrified, at what was a seemingly never-ending storm. Well, there I give it away. I say, it's a storm. The hallways began to fill with flying strips of gauze and floating bed sheets and powdery blue masks. Frightened, visitors held their forearms against their faces to prevent whatever plague rode piggyback on the wind. That underlined whatever plague rode piggyback on the wind. That helped establish social conditions because, especially since we're in COVID situation, I thought I would incorporate that into my story. So I'm showing you a little bit of believability, a little bit of reality. Whatever plague rode piggyback on the wind. I'm not going to read the rest. You can read it on your own, but I wanted to show you how you can use mood and social conditions within a story inspired by someone else. Here's your writing prompt. Now I want you to write. Now it's your turn. Your turn to, you had a little bit of a chance at the beginning with doing the Whistler picture and Flaming June, but now you're going to really think about how you're going to write a story. And hopefully it's the story that you will use for Proyecto Literario. It doesn't have to be. You might decide to use something else for Proyecto Literario, but this might be it. Who knows? Okay, so here's the prompt. You're going to write a story in which the protagonist, your main character, in which the protagonist's place of work and or their home has been altered. This could be a big change or a small one, but the change must affect the protagonist's life or the way they see the world. So it could be that it hasn't really affected their physical life, but it's changed the way in which they interact with everybody else. I'll give you an example. So since the COVID, I have two offices in my house. I have one office that I really need to pick up the books from the floor so I can use the office. And now I have my living room. My living room has become my office. Why? Well, that's because that's where I have my puppies. So we are all together here. So COVID has changed the way I even live in my home. I'm going to blame COVID. COVID has changed the way I live in my home. It's a big change for me. It might be a small one to someone else, but if I was going to write a story, I would think about that change. I would think about how COVID has made us live, work, eat, uh, laugh, dance, watch TV in sometimes very limited spaces because we're trying to avoid getting sick. So if I was going to write a story, I would come at it from that point. And the setting, my living room, which really is a living room now. Before it was just a pretty room where things were. Now it's a room in which I live, right? The living room plays an active role in the story. So you have to find a way in which setting plays an active role. What happens in that living room? What actions happen in that room that make the room come to life? Okay, I hope that was kind of clear, but of course you can email me if you have any doubts. So here are 3 questions to help you think. Consider the protagonist's relationship with their physical space, with their surroundings. Does the setting help or hinder? Is it an obstacle or a friend? What tools do you use to make the setting come to life and help you interact with your characters in your story? And remember to choose a mood that will help you think about your social conditions. Is your story mysterious or cheerful? Will it frighten your reader or make them laugh? Does the story start cheerful and become mysterious? Right? You could do both. Do you start with a comedy and then all of a sudden it becomes tragedy? These are all useful questions. Well, friends, amigos, amigas, aquí termino. I want to make sure that you understand that you have a story prompt. The story prompt has to do with creating a story around a place of work or a home. It doesn't have to be one and the same. It could be one or the other. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing what you've come up with. I definitely hope, I know that you have a lot of other workshops to visit, but I hope I will get to meet you all and talk to you about the time that we're writing and what happens to us when we write, because it sometimes it doesn't have to be a complete story at the end. It could just be an idea that we've been sort of working through. And so I'd love to have those conversations with you, and also just meet other UPR professors would be nice too. I feel we're all very much inside right now. Again, my name is Jane Alberdeston, a la orden en la UPR de Arecibo, el Departamento de Inglés, a little bit of Spanish at the end. And thank you, everybody. Remember that we are meeting December 15th. Today was part 1 of the taller, parte 1, and then we have the second part of the taller on December 15th at 5 p.m. We will be meeting to discuss the stories, whatever you wrote, and any other questions that you might have. And so December 15th, do not forget December 15th at 5 p.m. Thank you, everybody. Take care. I wish you the best and be safe.